Thanks for having me today, first of all. And I also want to say thank you for working on the community fiber art that I put back there. I was working on that last night, last minute, and I want to tell you what my 9-year-old said. She saw me working on it and she was helping me, and she said, "I love when you make your art, Mum, because it means that you're happy. And it makes me happy when you're happy." And so that was really cute, and I'm already crying. Oh my God. When I knew the theme was thread, being a fiber artist, I obviously really loved that. I'd always had a very strong connection to fabrics and thread, sewing from even a little kid. I grew up in a village in Yorkshire, England, and I was the kind of kid that liked like a really time-consuming, laborious project. And so when I found embroidery, it was perfect. Other than that, I would do things like jigsaw puzzles and reading and writing stories, things that took a really long time I really liked. I feel like I was kind of social, but I also kind of really needed a lot of like reset and recharge time. And I'd come home from school and do one of these kind of types of activities. Sometimes I'd be going to bed even, and I still like didn't have that peace in my body that I needed. And reading didn't work, which my youngest now says that. And I'd do this thing where I would go behind my curtains and climb onto my windowsill, and I would just watch the street. And it wasn't a busy street, it was a pretty quiet street. But I would just like watch the trees and like trace them, memorize them, and let my attention be drawn wherever it went. And that was kind of, looking back, my first memory of kind of having that soft focus, of having that kind of mindfulness. But I didn't know I was doing it, of course. Once I really got into stitching and cross-stitch as a kid, like it just kind of was this thing where I want to do this forever. I need to do this forever. And I went through college and university pursuing textiles. My work was very free. It also, not only did it have the therapeutic element that I needed, but it had a way for me to express myself. I feel like I was not always very loud, but I felt loud inside. I felt vibrant, and I felt like with my visual art, I felt safe to get that out of me. A lot of my work in college was very much inspired by this sense of adventure and wanting to travel, wanting to go places. I felt like when you were a visitor or a tourist, you could kind of like get this outside perspective of a place, and you could like really see it. And I really liked to just go places and just collect with my senses all of the smells and the patterns and everything you could find, and just like condense it into fine art. Around this time in college, I also met my husband, who was an American illustration student, and I got my adventure. He was also the first person that was like, you care about things as much as I do, and you have as much time to put into stuff as I do. And so like, it was a year where we just kind of like, without boundaries, just made stuff. And so I love this work still because it feels like pure artist to me with no responsibilities. And I brought it today, and you're welcome to like come touch it, and it's very kind of experiential. Of course, reality hit. Like, we got married, and within a couple of years we were in the US and we had kids. We were like juggling all these roles immediately, like parenting and like day jobs, and I wanted to like hold on to my creativity. I wanted to be present in parenting, but I didn't want to like not be a fine artist. So I set myself this challenge of creating an Etsy shop that would have a lot of freedom for me to kind of put in whatever I felt like I could make. But in typical me fashion, I wanted the name to last forever. Like I never wanted to think about it ever again. And so I asked myself, how do I create a timeless name, even though I don't know what I'm going to do? And so I asked myself what would always be true about my creative practice. And I ended up coming up with this name, The Thread House. I told myself, no matter what, I would always have thread, this connection to physical, the medium, fiber. And house because this sense of adventure had become kind of more of a sense for looking for belonging and home. Like I was dealing with moving. I was at home with my kids. I was grieving those changes. It ended up being this costume business that I did for years and loved. And some of you might even remember me doing that. It was good because it gave me that therapy that like I can do something with my hands, but it wasn't consuming me in a time when I just didn't have much more than that to give. Because I was trying to be present in the little years with my kids, you know, and it was chaotic. It felt like everything was kind of clashing and overlapping, and so I just taught them everything. I taught them to hike and to sew and to draw, and whenever I got chance, I would try and do like a little series of fiber art, and again, all of my influences were place, very much inspired by trying to create this fantasy home and what it looked like to be here in the Midwest. Whenever I went back to England, I always thought homesickness would kind of like go down, but it built. It felt like every time I went there, it felt that little bit more unfamiliar, and it was very spooky because now I had that tourist, like outside perspective of the place that was supposed to be home. There was a lot of grief, but there was also like an element where it felt like a gift. And this gift meant that I could go to England and really see it. And I could just like let my senses just let England just wash over me, and I just wanted to bottle it up and take it back with me. And so a lot of my work kind of did that too. I found a lot of kind of peace in nature. I felt like it was this portal between any kind of place. It was just earth, and it felt very, very free to just be me there. Didn't have to think about fitting in. And so me and the kids would often like look for magic, and it was born from those moments where your kids won't walk, but you're on a hike, and I wanted to enjoy the hike, but I saw this really cool fungi, and I was like, "Ooh, look at this! It's like magic!" And I saw it, it tweaked their inspiration, and so then we were looking for fungi. And before we know it, we've like walked the entire hike, and we've just been looking for fungi. And it felt like I taught them and myself how to notice like these little things that were just there, and we hadn't seen them. So a lot of my work was about kind of that grounding in that we found. I felt like everything was like so chaotic. Like I was doing so much to help him behind the scenes with his projects. Like I had all these parent projects, like my Etsy business, my fine art. Like I felt like I was scattered. But I still had that thing in me where, okay, I love like a really long-winded project, and like it's almost like dangerous to like switch on the on button of doing something. Like murals was one of them where he designed a mural and I'd paint it, and it was like I was like meditating, and I loved it, and I felt amazing. And it also felt like it was creating from like what I needed. Like everything kind of clashed, like fiber art and illustration and parenting, and this is for his Skillshare class. This is the algorithm monster. But it wasn't like I was going with the flow. I felt like it was all over the place in a bad way, maybe. And I kept telling myself, well, maybe when all my kids are in school and we've figured out what we're doing, maybe I'll like do one thing again. Like maybe I'll find that like one thing that goes through what I'm doing, and I'll get back to fiber art. And then we worked on a project that felt like it kind of broke away any connection I had to fiber art. And we worked on this kids' book. Now, it felt like it was a project that I thought I was working behind the scenes again on a project, and I loved that. Like it kind of like fed in well with my attention to detail, because that translated pretty well to editing words and like nerding out on words and naming these and things. But as we got kind of into working on this project's all about the human experience and all of the invisible, all of the invisible things that make that up. When we were working on it, it was like a really natural collaboration happened. And I always kind of see it as a Venn diagram. Like we met in the middle with like all of the feelings, but then all of his other characters were like weird and hyper and like cerebral and like cosmic. And I felt myself like filling in the gaps. Like, what about the more grounded ones? What about the sensory ones? Like there was a place for those too, and it rounded it out. And by the end of it, we knew it was something we had made together. And it was something that had both of our names on it. But I had this conflict in me still of, I know I worked on this. I can see me in this. But it was the first time I had signed my name to something that didn't look like my work. And so I was so worried that other people would not see me in it. Like, even though like this page is so me, it's a girl and she's using her senses to invite all of the invisible things. And she's talking about how sometimes you have to be patient. And if you've met us, he's not patient and he's not mindful. And he doesn't even live in his body, he says. So I'm in this book somewhere. But the one thing happened that like really helped me, and it was when we started to get like feedback on the book, and it felt like we got this like outsider perspective of what we did. Now this is really kind of cringy, and it's hard for me to share this next slide because it's like some words from the book reviews. But I'm not telling you it because it's like good reviews and I'm like, look at this. I'm telling you because of what the words they chose told me. So one of them called it playful and wise. Another said it was somehow, and I love the word somehow. Somehow it was simultaneously contemplative and exuberant. And then the final one I picked out said energetic, meandering prose. And I was like, it feels like all of them are doing the same thing where they're like putting these words together that almost seem like opposite words. Like but they weren't saying this book doesn't work because it's all over the place. And so what it kind of felt like they were saying was, we see two different personalities here. We see two different voices. And it was cool. And like, I'm an overthinker. So the next thing I did was start Googling all of these words. Like, which ones are me and what do they mean? And like looking at them, like, if you've met Andy J. Pizza, he's exuberant, right? But contemplative, an act of considering with attention, was everything I'd ever done, and I'd never used that word ever. But it was me looking in the woods for fungi, and it was everything I put in my fiber art, and it was the characters I contributed to the book. Like the one that's grounded, and the well-being is so grounded, it's growing moss. And then the now character, which is the wish you were here symbol, is about being here and now, in place and time. You know, I knew he was the energetic one, but the other word was meandering, following a winding course, zigzag, curving, the opposite of a straight line. I loved this word because it felt like not only did it visually describe my work, but it described like my creative path. It described how I was all over the place, but in a way that didn't feel negative, just kind of felt free. And I'd been convinced, I'll just go back for a second. I'd been convinced that like I had to come back to this one thing, this medium. And I'd been convinced that the thread that needed to go through everything that I did needed to be that. And when thread wasn't there, I kind of panicked. And I worried that I'd lost myself. But with the help of those kind of like outside perspectives, I felt like I'd been seen in not visual art, but in words. And I felt like, okay, maybe the thread that goes through everything that I'm doing isn't literal thread, but it's me. It's me and my unique, essential me that I bring to things. I feel like you can always ground yourself in your nature, in the way that you are. And you can find and apply what's essential about you into whatever you find yourself doing. And I still really love thread, and I think I'll always like loop back around to it. And I love just how thread is. Like, I love that it's flexible and it winds and it zigzags and it curves and it loops, but it's still connected. And I feel like when I'm stitching, one stitch at a time, I'm choosing where I get to take it. And it feels like, just like my fiber art, I was able to accept that the layers and the chaos and the freedom and all of these different pieces that I was so worried were clashing were perhaps not why it wasn't working, but perhaps were why it was, and why interesting things were now able to happen. So my takeaway is this idea that thread is not what you do, but how you do it. And so I think, you can ask yourself, like, what is your thread? What is essential you that you cannot help but do and be? What can be seen and felt in your work, no matter what your medium or your role is? Like, for me, I have this high attention to detail. I have this crazy amount of time I can pour into things. And it really translated into whatever I was doing, really, when I saw that. And if, like me, you do something that feels pretty left field from what you're used to doing, sometimes being able to kind of step away or get an outside perspective from somebody can help you find words for it, like exuberant. And now I love to think of myself as contemplative. And that's it. Thank you.